Hello, Austin. I'd like to thank you for allowing me into your homes for this 24th episode of Esoteric Science Roundtable. The theme for this evening's discussion is the work of the hierarchy. And this is a live call-in show, so I will be taking calls at about 8:40 if anybody cares to comment or has a question about today's topic. Excuse me. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. This is a phrase from the Bible that I've used on the air a few times in the past, and it's a good place to start to kind of give an idea of the condition of the people that make up the so-called kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God, also known as the hierarchy, also known as Christ and the church invisible. This elect body that has achieved this state of perfection, relatively speaking, does exist and does, excuse me, does go about working in order to help with the evolution and salvaging of humanity, and they tend to work behind the scenes. Now, this condition of being perfect, it's a bit for us to get a really firm grasp on, because these examples are kind of few and far between throughout all of antiquity as to people that we can look to for examples that have been able to express this condition in their own lives, and for us to see examples of the work they've been able to carry out. This condition is part of the process of evolution. As we grow and evolve, and again, evolution takes place on many levels. It takes place in the kingdoms and the levels below humanity, the level of humanity and above. And so evolution continues even at states of existence and consciousness higher than our physical state of existence. So that being the case, the process of evolution takes time, little by little, for these qualities to come into play. And basically, when it comes to humanity, when a person is conscious of the decision to put oneself on the path, so-called, on the path to spiritual return, if one is willing to allow themselves to make the steps, to carry out the steps needed to make this possible, one can begin this process of so-called perfecting oneself. And again, it is part of the evolutionary process. It's nothing that is new. It's been around for a long amount of time, and we do have different examples throughout time to show us, again, how this process is carried out. Now, again, to think of a condition, a human condition, in which no desire for the earth life exists is a bit difficult for us to fathom. We can't quite think of having no desire for anything. It's a very difficult state of mind to even comprehend, because in our daily lives we have things that we're very much fond of, and whether it's family members that we're fond of, maybe if we're in a relationship and we have a loved one that we're very fond of, it's hard for us to think of not having a desire for possibly a physical relationship, or having the desire for material wealth, material comforts. And what we come to know through our experience here on the earth plane as things that you tend to acquire, again, physical, tangible things, it's difficult for us to perceive of a state of mind in which we have no desire for these things. Now, also, it's good to keep in mind, and this is something I've spoken about in the past as well, that we are basically made of multiple bodies, if you will, that the dense physical is connected to an energy body called the etheric, and that is in turn connected to our desire body, or our astral body, or emotional body is another term for it, and that in turn is connected to the mental body, where thought is processed and used. Now, these three bodies are somewhat superimposed, if you will. It's not as if they're stacked one upon the next. They all are joined together, and they all form one single whole, one totality, based on these divisions. And this, again, is a reflection of spirit, of deity. There's a saying, an old saying, as above, so below. And we, as the human vessel, are reflections of God, and the way that God is manifest. And so these bodies of ours, most people tend to be centered in one or the other of the bodies. Some people are going to be centered in the emotional nature, and they're going to be more in tune with their, again, they're going to be more centered in the emotions. They're going to be more centered in the desire nature, and so that's going to be their motivating force for the most part that's going to lead them. They're going to go by their emotions, they're going to go by their desires, and that's going to be the dominant factor that's going to control their lives. There are some people that are a bit more analytical, they're a bit more thoughtful, and they are a bit more, they tend to think before they act, and they're a bit more rational. You could possibly use that term as well. And so they're more centered in the mental thinking apparatus as opposed to another one of our aspects, again, like I mentioned, the emotional. And then there are some people that are just centered more so in the dense lower nature, and that the only emotions that they generally tend to generate are emotions of the self, things to glorify the self, and they would never really have an emotion of unselfishness, an emotion of love towards another person, or an emotion of kindness or anything along those lines usually. And so those generally are the three divisions that mankind tends to fall into. Now, when one again makes a conscious decision to work with this process of evolution and to speed up the process of evolution by one's own actions, one's thoughts, and one's action, then we can perfect these bodies. We perfect our lower vehicles, and we get to the point where we kill out the desire nature. We kill out any longing, any aspirations for material nature. And again, this concept of perfecting oneself, that we again lose the limitation that we would experience in the three bodies, the physical, the emotional, and the mental. That no longer holds sway on us, and so we have relative freedom and flexibility within these three bodies. And the aspect that kind of keeps them all tied together, if you will, can be considered the soul. And the soul is what is the vehicle that we come into incarnation through over time, and it's the part that stays intact, although we take on different vessels during different incarnations. Like for instance, right now I'm wearing a Corey suit. Well, the soul that's behind this Corey suit is going to continue on and has been before wearing another suit of clothes, if you will, and another personality. But the soul essence remains the same. And that soul is what keeps us, as we have desire and we have karma to pay off, we have debts to pay off, that is what keeps us reincarnating. That keeps us coming down to the earth plane to relive our experiences and to try to get past these negative traits and these lower qualities in order to perfect this physical vehicle, to emphasize the quality of love, and to not pay attention to our lower nature. And that is the key as far as trying to do that sort of work. Now, again, when one is able to get past any level of desire, the soul, the vehicle of desire and incarnation, desire to incarnate, necessity to incarnate, that vehicle, that periodical vehicle, ceases to exist. And these so-called masters, if you will, the hierarchy, or Christ and the Church Invisible, reach a state of perfection in which they no longer need a soul because they have no desire for things of the earth. And so the only reason that they're even here still amongst men is the desire to serve and to help the race. And they have reached a point which can be called scientifically the fifth initiation. And again, the process of initiation is a series of tests and trials that leads to an expansion of consciousness. And so these men and women, having gone through these series of tests and trials and expansion of consciousness, have gotten to this point that's called, again, scientifically, the fifth initiation, that allows them to have a state of masterhood, if you will, over the physical plane. And so that they, at this point, when they are able to refine their vehicle to this point and to be an expression of love and to be an expression of divinity, then they have the opportunity to work in a physical vehicle or out of the physical vehicle. And the physical vehicle that they operate in is one that they generate. They generate because like attracts like, and so they will generate a pure and refined vehicle that will be their physical vehicle that they'll work through. Now, some may say, all this talk about the masters is good and fine and what have you, and all the talk about Christ and the Church Invisible and the hierarchy, but, I've never seen one riding the bus, or I've never seen one talking on television, I've never seen one, in a public, high-profile place, and some people might think that that would be a just and fit and proper situation, that they would somehow bring themselves out and say, hey, we're the masters, we're going to help you guys out, just listen to what we have to say, and we're going We're going to, smooth things over. We're going to get you past these rough times. And that's not the way in which these gentlemen and women work. The way in which they work is they work behind the scenes. You're not going to see them interacting firsthand in the affairs of men so much. They work behind the scenes and they impress the minds of men. And this is something to keep in mind, that they do not impose on our free will. And free will really is the key for our planetary evolution. We have choice at every step of our evolution. So as we choose to bring on more spirit or less spirit, it's always our choice. We always have that free will, always, to make these conscious decisions as to what we want to express. Do we want to express love? And do we want to work to help others? Or do we want to be a selfish person and just to glorify ourselves and to do what we can to help ourselves exclusively and, forget everybody else. Don't even worry about anybody else. And so it's always our choice to follow which direction we choose. Now, again, these masters keeping this firmly well in mind, and also themselves having gone through all the stages of evolution, having known all of the temptations and trials of the earth life that we experience. So they're very well aware of the temptations that we deal with in this earth plane, and they have become perfect living expressions of being in the world but not of the world. Now, they do still, again, occupy residence on the physical globe. They are not generally amongst the midst of men, and they tend to work through impression. And so they have different groups, and these groups are called ashrams. And the different ashrams or groups work together, and they have the different disciples and initiates, if you will, the different members that work in conjunction with these masters that will further carry out the work of impression and the work behind the scenes that needs to be done. Now, there is a definite progression that takes place that allows the energy to travel through the different kingdoms in nature. And this if we can start at just one beginning point, and this is not the absolute beginning point, but for us, relatively speaking, it's the highest point that we can really generally concern ourselves with, and that is the will aspect of God. And the locality, the place that contains the so-called will of God, the point on our globe that contains that will aspect is called Shambhala. And in some, it's also been called Shangri-La as well. It's another name. And again, these terms may be somewhat familiar, maybe vaguely familiar, but again, it does show that how through the centuries it has pervaded and even made its way into pop culture with these terms. Again, Shambhala, Shangri-La, karma, reincarnation, all these terms that we hear that may or may not mean anything to us, but they've found their way into our modern vocabulary. Now, again, these men and women generally work away, they generally live away from the populated areas, and they generally work again through their disciples. Now, one of the reasons being is because of the fact that they are so pure, if you will, that it's difficult for them to be around people directly anyway, because of the bad vibe, basically, that humanity throws out. It's difficult for them. It makes them uneasy, if you will. It makes them uneasy to be in close proximity to humanity because of the way our emotions are flowing, and we're so full of envy, spite, hatred, all of these qualities that still are very much ingrained in humanity, that we basically reek, that ooze out of us, that are coming out of us constantly, until we make a conscious choice in our lives to check and to redirect that energy. But those that are unaware of this whole process, that just get caught up in their everyday, workaday lives and know no more, and are just stuck in the blinders, these are the type of people that it would be difficult for a master to come into the scene and first of all, be close to them to begin with, and they're not going to have any understanding of who this person is and who he is, what he's capable of, and so they won't have an appreciation likely for this quality. And so again, that's another reason why these masters don't work directly with mankind, but they do work directly with the members of humanity that are able to impress, if you will. Now, how does the idea of impression work? Again, it's not a forcing or anything like that. The way that thought works, the way that mind works, everything that is and everything that will be, you can kind of put into a pool, if you will, just a big depository, if you will, and you can call that the Akashic Records, and that is everything that was, is, and potentialities, future possibilities of what will be. Now, all that is available once we have the access to it. Once we have that spiritual access to it, we can make use of these records. And so we know, again, through the evolutionary process, we can kind of gauge possibilities. We can kind of gauge the potential of what's going to happen. And so since these masters are able to know more behind the scenes of what the potentials and the probabilities are, they're able to impress certain segments of humanity that they see that are fit vessels, if you will, to carry out further work. They are able to see basically how much light we emit, if you will. That's how they're able to gauge more or less who the people are that would be ready to be able to participate in this work, willingly or unwillingly, or unknowingly, not unwillingly, but unknowingly. Because in some instances, the work is carried out purposefully, again with the initiates and the disciples of these so-called groups or ashrams of the hierarchy or of Christ and the Church Invisible, that there are active members, again the disciples and initiates of these groups, that are actively engaged in this work. They're knowing of the work, and so they know the plan, so-called, if you will, and they're in charge of their little aspect of this plan and how to implement it into world affairs. Now, they have to constantly be concerned with an opposing faction to the hierarchy, which is sometimes known as the Black Lodge or the Dark Brotherhood. They have many other terms as well to describe them, and they basically are the black magicians, whereas the hierarchy would be so-called white magicians. And so there is a constant interplay between these two forces jockeying for position. Now, the black magician seemingly has more power here on the earth plane. And if people look around a lot of times, they're going to probably, be somewhat despairing of the situation, because things do, in some instances, look somewhat hopeless for us. If we choose to take that perception into ourselves and make that part of ourselves, sometimes people are stuck in that limitation where they feel that we're in a hopeless rut and that nothing is going to get us out. And I think that is very limiting thinking, and that we can do things to get ourselves out of this position, this seeming rut. And so again, you have jockeying for position, these two forces. Now the Black Lodge forces, or the black magicians, again, the methods are similar. It depends on motive, and I've spoke about this before as well. It's kind of like the Force in Star Wars, where one's motive is going to determine how the energy flows, how energy is directed from thoughts as to how one thinks. If one is thinking good thoughts, one is going to throw out a good vibe, and they're going to send out, good loving energy. And if one is thinking negative, separative thinking, then one is going to send out a bad vibe, if you will. And so there's this constant playing between these two factions and forces, and certainly humanity, being right smack dab in the middle, is a big contributing factor as well. Humanity's free will is constantly in flux at all times, and so what is termed mass consciousness, or the individual numbers added up, 1 plus 2 plus 3 on up to 6 billion, that collective thought pattern is feeding into our whole collective paradigm. We do, in essence, create our reality, and that's a pretty popular metaphysical phrase or concept, but it has a lot of validity, that we do by our thoughts, because a thought is a real thing, that we do create through our thoughts what our experiences are going to be here on this earth plane. And so as we move through our daily lives, we can either be aware of what's going on, unaware of what's going on, and that's going to determine how we choose to act. Now, certainly there are different outlets for humanity to be aware of what's going on. You've got a lot of good other people down here at Access that are bringing out information. You've got the internet, and really, unfortunately, those are some of the main ways that we have to try to get information out to people in the mainstream, is through some of the more so-called alternative media, because the mainstream media has been so controlled for such a long period of time that it's difficult to get real legitimate information, and it's difficult to get past any news that's just completely disempowering, completely frightening, and completely just negativity, just completely filled out through all the news. And I'm sure everybody that's taken the time to watch any newscast is going to be very well aware of that you don't get the positive, uplifting news through our media and through the major sources very often. We get the sidetracked issues. We get, the glamour, we need to look a certain way. We need to dress a certain way, buy this kind of car. We get caught up in all of the carrying on the status quo that is propped up for us that we feel we need to be a part of. And so again, as humanity is working and wading its way through life, certain segments of humanity are going to have the life experiences that are going to awaken them to a larger reality. Now again, some people have made the choice to stay within the blinders and stay within a limited perception of reality, and so they're not going to be able to have a fuller experience. And also I would say that it's really, as the best of my estimation, persons that have some sort of a spiritual basis, and not necessarily a religious basis. I'm not talking about somebody that's going to be, attending church on a regular basis, but somebody that has a true spiritual sense is going to have the capacity inherent in them to see past the blinding limitation. Those that are devoid of spirit seem to be the most convoluted within this matrix situation. They seem to be the most snowed over, if you will, and the most asleep as to the larger realities, because they don't have that inner kernel awakened whatsoever, or to such a small degree that they just glaze over and it doesn't mean anything to them, even at the level of conscience, let alone intuition. They don't pay much attention, and so they don't have that sense that there's something going on that's wrong. They don't have a sense that in the larger picture there's a lot of high shadiness going on in high places. They don't have the perception to grasp that. And so I think that is a key fundamental, and you're going to find those people that are bringing out this information for our general perusal, for us to make use of, are going to be coming from at least somewhat of a spiritual perspective, because again, I feel like you need that spiritual basis to have a larger awareness, a larger perception. And again, I'm not talking about a churchianity or a strictly religious dispensation or dogma, but just a general spiritual sense that we have a soul, that we are one with God, that we are all interrelated as God's creations, and that we have work to carry out. And I spoke last week about the risen Christ, and again, not to think of the risen Christ as a blood sacrifice for us, just to save the lazy Christians because they say that they believe that event took place. Their responsibility has to be factored in, and we have to take responsibility for our actions at every turn. Now, if we're aware of what's going on in the larger reality, and we choose to do nothing about it, really, in my estimation, you're being more part of the problem than anything. By consciously acknowledging that there is something going on and that they're aware of problems, but just sticking your head in the sand and just saying, oh, there's nothing we can do, or it's a hopeless situation, those are the kind of limiting thinking. That's the kind of limiting thinking that's going to keep those people ineffective, or in some instances perpetuating this negativity that we're having to deal with. Now, those that do wish to enslave us, as I term them, and I've chosen to call them on this show on many occasions, I'd like to kind of clarify a bit between the different levels of who these people are. Now, some people are going to throw out there, as far as an example of these individuals that wish to enslave us, some of the lower rung echelons, like your CFR, your Council on Foreign Relations, or your Bilderberger groups, and these kind of individuals. Now, certainly there are these men and women involved in these organizations that are part of the larger totalitarian picture, if you will, that are part of all of the goals that are trying to make a so-called one world order that's a totalitarian version, that's a negative version, and where our free will is going to be compromised and our mobility is going to be compromised. Now, I think that these people, again, I would consider them, even though they are relatively high up in certain people's estimations, I would still consider them relatively low in the whole big scheme of things, and that all the people in these organizations are not necessarily nefarious, evil individuals that are just completely out to enslave mankind and to bring about our utter ruin. I don't think that's the case in all instances. I think, and just with the United Nations, and I've spoken about this before as well, I don't think that every person that works for the United Nations is going to be part of some grand conspiracy that's looking to destroy us. I think that the way that it's packaged as this humanitarian endeavor, this one world order that's going to be for everyone, the way that it's being bandied about in the mainstream, that there are these members of this, the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Bilderbergers, at least some members, that feel that they are helping humanity, that they are doing their part to bring forth a betterment for mankind. If they're part of some group that's bringing out vaccinations to some third world country, maybe in their estimation they're doing a good thing. If they're not aware that there may be perhaps some cancer virus, or there may be some negative elements in these viruses that are really more detrimental than beneficial, that are causing more harm than good, but they're not knowing the full picture is going to prevent them from having a fuller awareness and being able to, just say no. That's the bottom line for us. When we understand the level of control that we're having to experience here as humanity collectively, and again, that's control through the media, through our food sources, fluoridation of the water supply, economic control, educational control. Once we really get a big grasp of the larger picture, then we can see again how these different factions are trying to play into the whole global total, and how, again, certain members of them, I feel, even though there are members of these organizations, are somewhat misguided. They have a humanitarian aspect in mind, but they're not aware of the full nature of the facts, and so they go along with the plans, not knowing the full story. And so I can't say that they're all entirely to blame for that. The entities, if you will, that I'm more concerned with are, again, your Black Lodge, those black magicians, those men and women that have just shown utter selfishness, that are so evil, if you will, that we can't even conceive of how intense that evil is, how deep and how in-depth that evil truly is. We have no real conception from the average human perspective to get a grasp or to have a gauge of how just strictly evil some of these members of these groups are, and that these groups, these people that are trying to bring out a so-called New World Order, that you have these groups behind the scenes, again, your Black Lodge forces, that are working and impressing and trying to get these members of humanity to go along with their big goal. And these members of humanity are going to go along with it either through their ignorance or through being compliant with it. And they're going to be either willing participants or ignorant participants in bringing, again, the situation into the fore that's not in everyone's best interest. That's going to be limiting, that's going to limit our free will, limit our mobility. That, again, these factions that are jockeying for position, the Black Lodge so-called, are using these different members of society, and they use them, they directly influence them. They don't indirectly influence them, but they basically put them in a compromised position. They basically put them in a position where they're forced to help in some instances. Whereas, again, the hierarchy, or Christ and the Church Invisible, the work that they do is more behind the scenes, and it's more of an impressionist work, where they're just influencing the minds of men. They're throwing an idea out there. If it's an idea for a new educational system or a new economic system or a new form of entertainment or whatever it may be that would be for the uplifting and the betterment of humanity, they'll throw that concept out there, if you will, into this, what I've called the Akashic Records, or into just mind, if you will, collective mind. And that so those members of humanity that are ripe for that particular idea, whether it's a scientific discovery, an educational process, an economic system, they're going to be more ripe and more primed to receiving that impression. And so it will seem as if they've come up with the idea on their own, just out of thin air. It's just they grasped this concept from somewhere. They don't know how it came to them, but all of a sudden, because they had a humanitarian slant, they were able to bring down this impression that's kind of, if you will, kind of just hovering out there. And these are the gentlemen and women that are more capable of bringing it down and making it an actual physical plane manifestation. And that's the key, is once these impressions are thrown out there, that those that can grasp them and grasp the concept can bring the concept, the thought, if you will, down into the physical plane activity and make it a thing. Make it, again, an economic system, an educational system, a scientific discovery, an art form, any number of things that we've been impressed with throughout time. And that's not to say that every great discovery is directly influenced by the hierarchy so-called, but I will say that every great discovery, especially those that have gone on to the benefit of humanity, have been divinely inspired, if you will, and there are different levels of that inspiration. Now, this transmission of light and love and power from, again, the will aspect does have its transmission in different ways. You've got average humanity that's in prayer and contemplation, and that is hoping for some outside intervention to kind of save us from this miserable situation that many perceive that we're in. And so there's a lot of fervent and earnest prayer going on right now for people that are trying to have some sense of relief in their life because they're very frustrated and they're very confused right now. And these play right into the hands, those conditions, confusion, frustration, and fear. Those are the fuel and the food, again, for these Black Lodge minions. They are the ones that make use of this disruption in order to further their goals, their selfish ends. And so it's in their best interest to keep constant chaos and corruption and disruption in the forefront that we're readily aware of, and that we can see graphic examples at every turn of what we would consider corruption or decadence or insidiousness. We have it thrown in our faces at every turn so that we feel that this is the pervasive climate everywhere in the world. We get the perception through watching the media and through what we're allowed to see and the magazines and what have you. We're given the perception that it's bad everywhere and that everybody is hopeless and everybody is helpless. And that is completely not the case. It does start with thought. Thought is the key. And thought is what generates this whole universe. Thought is what makes our manifest universe stay put and not dissipate and not just fade to collapse unto itself. Thought, living thought, keeps this expression afloat, if you will, keeps it intact. Thought is what keeps our body in the form that it is without just withering and just blowing away and just all the component little particles and atoms of our body just completely just obliterating and just going off in their own directions. Will, if you will, is what brings that and collects that and keeps it condensed into a form. And so that will, again, finds its way through a series of descending steps as it steps down. As it's stepped down and made available for the lesser kingdoms. And an idea of how that is stepped down, it's stepped down, again, through what I call Shambhala, or the term I use, Shambhala, which is, again, an old term, but it refers to the center where the will of God is known, the physical location or point of focus on our globe that the will comes into play, if you will, where it focuses itself. And then it, in turn, is stepped down and is differentiated or is split up into different energy that different varying segments of humanity are able to bring in and make use of. And it's stepped down through what are called the 7 rays, and I've spoken of them a bit on the show before in the past as well. But just thinking of the 7 musical notes before you reach the octave or the 8th note, or the 7 different colors. If you put white light through a prism, it breaks up into 7 different various hues. It's the same way. The will, you can think of the will as white light going through a prism. The will is going through this medium, if you will, this substance, and is stepped down, is differentiated into 7 rays. And these 7 rays, in turn, condition the 7 main ashrams, or groups, if you will, of the so-called masters, or of Christ and the Church Invisible. And these 7 major ashrams or groups relate to one another. And so then it is stepped down again through the different, if you will, spiritual intermediaries and even other evolutions also that are able to make use of this energy and to step it down so that it can be ingested, not really ingested, but made use of by humanity in the lower kingdoms. So then it finally makes its way down, and also it's the invocation of man as well, our prayers and our suffering and the conscious effort to bring down the will of God also plays into that as well. Now also there's another aspect after, again, these the spiritual beings that I spoke of, in the situation that's called the Council Chamber of Sanat Kumara. Now Sanat Kumara being the consciousness that indwells our globe, the consciousness of the planet, just like consciousness indwells our physical vessel, or an animal, or a flower, or a mineral even for that matter too. There's a consciousness that indwells that form. And so the consciousness of our planet has, if you will, a council or a body of inhabitants of the globe that work in conjunction with that will. And these 3 members, again, as this gradual energy is stepped down, the Manu, or the Lord of Civilization, the Bodhisattva, or Christ, or the Mahachohan, and he could kind of be thought of as the dean, if you will, of the hierarchy. It's stepped down through those 3 members, and these members are members of the hierarchy, so-called, but they also have a dual function as emissaries or intermediaries between the will aspect and humanity. So they're the go-betweens, if you will. They're the middle point between the will and our physical vessel, the physical man. And so the hierarchy generally relates to the love aspect, or the heart center. And so you get, again, will or mind, step down into the heart aspect, or the love aspect, and then step down into physical plane distribution for mankind to make use of. And there are different, again, there are different ashrams, and there are various portions of these ashrams that make up 49 secondary ashrams, or groups, if you will, and the disciples, initiates, and the masters that comprise those particular groups as well, on lesser down the hierarchy chain, if you will, hierarchical chain that it steps down. And again, the members that are, you would term initiates or disciples, are those men and women that are pretty much not really like you and me so much, but they're more highly evolved, and you definitely be able to see the work that they've done. You would be able to see them as an indication of, again, the process of evolution and what can be accomplished through the physical vehicle if one puts one's mind to it, if one can make this expression manifest on the physical plane through one's own thinking. And so again, these disciples, being conscious of this overall plan, if you will, this plan for the raising of consciousness of humanity, the evolutionary urge and surge forward, and also the process of instilling love, overcoming our dense physical material nature with the element of love. It's all part and parcel of this work. And that, again, these members that work knowingly and willingly with the plan, if you will, are making use of it in different aspects of our earth life. And they also are making these ideas accessible and, again, stepping them down. And so you see it's a gradual process from a high point to where it's a very pure aspect of the will of God, and then it has to be stepped down so that us, in our conscious understanding, can make use of it. We can't directly grasp the will of God. We have to have an intermediary. There have been a handful of times in the past where we have gotten a direct shot, if you will, a direct focus from the will to humanity, but that's only really taken place a handful of times throughout our history. But it will be more prevalent in the future as mankind becomes more evolved and fits himself to be a more capable vessel for this type of work. that mankind will be able to, because what's going to happen is the hierarchy and the kingdom of humanity are going to merge, and that will be what will be known as the kingdom of heaven, so-called. And so as mankind makes his consciousness more inclusive, he can expand his consciousness to the point where it's inclusive of the concept of a master, or again, Christ and the Church Invisible. And he can, upon expanding his awareness, put himself in a conscious position to work with these individuals. And so there will be a closer rapport, generally, a congealing and a coming together, where the work that's going on behind the scenes through these masters can become more and more physical plane work that's actively engaged upon with members of humanity that can grasp, again, this plan for our positive evolution, that they can make use of this plan, and that they can help this process out, and that we all can play our part once we come to the understanding that there is a general plan, a divine expression, if you will, that even humanity at the lowest level can take part of this opportunity to help. And again, it starts with thought. I can't emphasize that enough. Thought is the key in this free will, on this free will planet that we exist upon, that our thought is going to create and change at any given time what our paradigm of reality is. And so that's why it's up to us to expand our reality. If you will follow the Chris Athanas analogy, the reality expander, it's up to us to make the moves to expand our reality so that we can be more all-inclusive and we can make use of this process. It's entirely up to us to make use of this energy, if you will, that's available. And we are the ones that are going to make the conscious decision to move forward with that. So we all can play our role at some level once we become aware. Now, certainly, as I spoke of earlier, there are segments of the population that are going to be unaware of what's going on. And that's, again, according to their choosing, or just part of the role that they've chosen to play, a forgetting role, and so that they're away from reality to the point that this physical plane for them is it, or is a substantial real plane. They don't think of this as being just a precipitated version of spirit, that this is just dense concrete spirit, if you will. And so that process will definitely evade some people and elude some people because they're not going to be able to grasp in the process. And that's not to say that they're going to be forsaken, they're going to be damned or anything like that, because the process of evolution is not an unkind process. Always those that can't make the grade, if you will, that can't follow the concept of the kingdom of God on earth or the kingdom of heaven on earth, in which there will be interaction among the fifth kingdom in nature, which is again the hierarchy, Christ and the Church Invisible, and the fourth kingdom in nature, or the human kingdom, that they will in turn merge and be one collective conscious body, working body, and then again will allow the direct influence for the will aspect of God to directly work with us more so in the future as we prove ourselves again more evolved and more ready for that work. But we do have to, in our individual lives, get our game together, if you will, so that we can make ourselves fit and worthy, prove ourselves worthy of deserving extra work. It's really up to us as to how we choose to proceed, as to whether this evolutionary process is going to go forward at a slow pace or a rapid pace. Now, keeping in mind always that we are being influenced, if you will, and there are those negative entities that have deemed it their responsibility to take over this planet, to basically use us as pawns and for whatever ends that they choose. And so they are the ones that are behind the scenes manipulating those members of humanity and that have set themselves up in the so-called secret societies that have split themselves up into varying camps. Now, certainly as you have these negative alien influences that are influencing the negative humans and the Black Lodge or the Black Magicians that have been here on the planet for a number of years, for quite a long time, you see that faction working together. There's always going to be light to dark. There's always going to be different poles. And so for us to think and to get caught up in this idea that the secret societies are all working for this negative New World Order concept is not the case. They have stolen that concept from the good secret societies and the positive people that are truly looking out for humanity's interest. They've adopted those terms. The term New World Order has been adopted and used and abused by these factions, so that when you hear the term New World Order, you think of a totalitarian, generally you think of a totalitarian world in which we're basically just no better than slaves. We don't have any free will, no free mobility, and we're going to be at the whim of our rulers, whoever our self-appointed rulers, whoever comes out on the top of the heap. Those would be the ones that would choose to rule us if we let them. And it's all about choice. We have to understand that. If we let that paradigm take place, if we let, all of the things that are being propped up as potentials through some of the information you get on Access, through some of the other more media-based shows that come up with a lot of documentation to back up the kind of scary allegations that are made, we have to understand that this process that's going on. We have to understand those plans, but we have to keep fear here. We can't internalize fear, and I can't emphasize that enough, that fear is something that has to be known about, dealt with, and recognized, but cannot be internalized. We can't take fear in here inside of ourselves because we're just playing right into the hands of those that wish to enslave us. We have to make the move to understand what we're up against, but to butt heads directly is not going to bring about a positive change either. The goal is going to be to impose a new rhythm, and that is the key here with our thoughts, with our thinking. The little man in the street has to get his head together, get his thinking together. Once he's aware that there's a problem, there's a situation here that needs to be dealt with, and get past the victim aspect, to get past the helplessness and the hopelessness, to understand that by thinking the good and positive thoughts, that we can collectively impose a new rhythm. And this so-called New World Order, this structure, the superstructure that's in place, that's being put together right now, right in front of our eyes on a world scale at a breakneck pace, that we can take that superstructure, and once we kick the filth to the curb, if you will, get rid of these junkie monkeys that are trying to enslave us, and not really get rid of them in a forceful manner, but just say no. I can't emphasize how important that is, to just say no. One of the president's ex-wives told us that a million times, and I know you all are familiar with that phrase, just say no. It's that simple, and we can apply that same thinking, that same philosophy, just say no philosophy, to any enslavement that's being foisted upon us. We can check that. Once we acknowledge this activity for what it is, and understand that there is manipulation going on, we can again check it. We can understand it for what it is, and we can just say no, and we can impose a new rhythm with our thinking, and envision in our thinking, in our daily lives, and keep in the forefront of our minds the type of world in which we'd like to live in, the type of educational system that's not going to be hell-bent on vaccinating all the kids, getting them on the Ritalin and the Prozac, or whatever the psychotropics are, to keep them in check, to get rid of the AD, whatever, the attention deficit disorders and all these kind of things. They're trying to, again, control us at the earliest ages. It should be very evident to people that we're being controlled at all turns in that respect. But it's up to us to consciously... It's up to us to consciously say no. Just say no. I'm going to go ahead and take a call and see what this gentleman has to say. Hello, you're on the air.
Hey, Corey, how you doing, sir?
Good, yourself?
First-time caller, long-time listener.
Mighty fine. You have anything you care to share this evening?
I just had a couple of questions, or actually a question.
Sure.
I wanted to go with the, if we're supposed to just say no,
yes,
and we're supposed to get the, as you said, like just the, Joe Blow on the street, get his thoughts in order.
Right.
The only problem is the enslavement's already begun for all the people that are, the people, just the regular people. I mean, we've got the bills, we've got television, we've got
right.
We've got to come up with.
Right.
In order to, it seems like in order to change any of that, we'd actually have to go through a radical change instead of just trying to make it, through.
Well, that's the whole thing. It's incremental. As people start waking up and they start kind of, nudging their buddies and their friends and their families, it's incremental. It's kind of like the scale that judges the earthquakes. A 2.3 or a 3 is nothing. You don't even feel it. But when you get to a 5, a 7, it's exponential. And so, again, from small, humble beginnings, this could really blow up into a worldwide phenomenon, which it is. If you understand it, you can follow the little internet circles and the different groups that are talking about this on their own time and trying to think of ways that they can counteract it. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, and I would encourage people not to be discouraged, that there is activity out there. People are trying to get it together and trying to help one another.
All right. Yeah, that works.
But you got to be part of it. If you think negatively like that,
I'm not thinking negative. I'm just along the lines that a radical change is needed, because it
well, it
seems
will
like
be a radical
anytime
change.
somebody comes up with a independent thought, it's either strictly for their themselves or their own agenda.
A lot of times
which,
it is.
Through history, it's almost always, the stronger, the leader, the ones with the leadership abilities manage to guide everybody towards a one destructive purpose.
They're going to take advantage of them. Yeah, exactly. You got to follow that vision of the leader to hell or high water, whatever comes first. And so that's true. People get caught up in that a lot of times. But we have to, once you get aware of the fact that there's something sketchy going on, you have to consciously put aside those distractions. That's the whole key. You got to consciously say no to just incessant TV watching, you know what I mean? Incessant distractions that are just going to keep you limited. You got to have to find little by little ways that you can get out of your shell and do something positive. And it does start with just thinking, first of all, positive thought, and then expanding out from there. And, taking some responsibility. Don't be afraid to take a little responsibility, and don't be afraid of what people are going to think about you if you're going to be espousing these kind of opinions about things. If you feel that this is what's going on, you feel that this is, there's something shady going on, don't be afraid to speak up about it, because those that cower in the corner and that are just, oh, woe is me, it's all helpless, there's nothing we can do, those are the ones that are going to get trampled on first. Those are the ones that are going to be caught in the machine. They're going to be fodder for the war machine, and they're not going to.
But the factions that are already in control or trying to control have already a much more organized base.
They're very firmly entrenched. That superstructure that's already built up that they have will still remain. We're just going to take it over. And that is going to be part and parcel also because of the fact that there's so much infighting at the highest levels. When you understand, which we can't really understand, ultimate greed, that you've got these factions, this handful at the very top levels that have been in these cabals and these agreements, if you will, to kind of divvy up, hey, that's yours, that's yours, that's yours, and to hopefully, they hope that they're going to be collectively working together and be able to appease each other, but still get what's mine, if you will. But that's going to be their undoing, in my estimation. They're not going to be able to successfully keep their own little piece of the pie and respect this other guy's pie. They're going to always be eyeing the other pie. I don't think they're going to be able to get past that selfish, because it's inherent in them to such a deeply ingrained degree that they can't get past that thinking. And so they're going to eat their own, and they're going to implode upon their own self-destructive system, is my estimation. And that's how we can impose a new rhythm. We bring our new rhythm of what we would like to see, and it's just a matter of keeping at the forefront. What would we like to see? How would we like to see the world? What are the things that we, want to see?
But we also have to organize certain steps to ensure that what we see, we're not going to be, with so many small factions that think the same, without any kind of unity.
Well,
and they've already, obviously if they want you in, and you're going to get into a higher source of, to the power to where you have control over the media, and you have control over the military, and you have control over, taxes, and you have control over all these things that basically can run, everyone else, there has to be a way of coming together to be able to.
Okay, and that's
the only way it's going to be radical change.
I do agree with you, but that's where thought can transcend matter. Thought can transcend these small groups, because thought is more of a collective. You can't just think of each individual pocket with a little brainstorm over their little area, their own work. There's a big brainstorm over the whole globe that everybody's tapping into and everybody's plugged into. And so by virtue of us the little camps in different areas having the aha, they're plugged into the bigger aha, and that's going to cause this imposition, or us bringing in, by our will, a new rhythm.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, Corey, man, this is Sean, and good talking to you, brother. Good talking to you.
I'm sure I'll talk with you again.
I think Old Cowboy's going to give you a call up next.
All right, mighty fine. More the merrier. You guys have a nice evening. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Later.
Yes, I would like to bring that up, that it's in our hands. It's in our hands more so than we realize. If we give up our power, and that's a famous thing too in the metaphysical terminology, phraseology, giving up one's power, we just have to say no to this limiting that's always being imposed upon us. And we can, once we get our discernment together and we have the aha together, then we'll know. We'll have an intuitive understanding of who we can work with and who not to work with. And so that'll help us out. Once we can trust our intuition, beyond any shadow of a doubt, use our intuition, know that it's telling us the truth, then we can find those people that can help us out. We'll know who the common groups are that we can work with, and we'll know what can be done. We'll know how to proceed. It'll happen again exponentially. Hello, caller.
Hello. A couple of times you mentioned the media,
Yes.
and well, Ed, the more you talked and the more I listened, I kind of forgot what I wanted to say. But in your opinion, do you think how damaging do you think that the media is to the public as far as should we not know how much is really going on in the world? How damaging is it to the
That's a
youth
very
in
good
America?
question. That's a very good question.
And how many ideas does it put into the minds of some of the youth in well, not just this country, but countries around the world?
Worldwide, absolutely.
And,
Right.
But should it be censored or should it not be? I mean, because I like to know what's going on in the world. But,
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. I'm gonna let you go, and I'm gonna answer that question now. Only a minute or so
Okay.
left, but I appreciate your call. Thank you so much. I would say that yes, it's a dual-edged sword. Certain people are going to be able to react to that information, and they're going to be able to make use of it and take it for what it is, and not let it just make them just completely afraid that we're doomed and we're all going to hell in a handbasket. There's no hope for us. Certain people are going to be able to use the news and see who's zooming whom, and to watch it and to intelligently pick it apart and analyze it. And again, that comes with this knowing, this awareness. You're going to have that awareness, the aha factor kick in first for you to be able to use the tools, like use the media and see what the agenda is and follow the patterns and understand the patterns. And once you have that awareness, you'll see the patterns fit and you'll be able to predict what's going to happen next. It's not a matter of being psychic. It's a matter of understanding the bigger picture and understanding where the next move is going to, where the next domino is going to fall. And certainly it is limiting because it does. People that don't have enough of their own free will are just going to let the box tell them what to think. They're just going to sit in front of the box and let their mind rot. There are those people that are going to be able to take what's given to them on the box and through the internet and what have you, and make use of what's going on. And then there is that segment that's going to completely be disbelieving that this could even be remotely possibly true. There's no way in their perception that a new world order situation is coming down the pike. They just cannot perceive of it. They've got the blinders on and they can't experience it. And that's, again, a dual-edged sword, because if you're not thinking about it, you're not contributing with your thought towards that overall picture of negativity. You don't have the gloom and doom factor. You've got the, oh, that's ridiculous and absurd mentality. And so you're not helping it to manifest. And so that's kind of a double thing. You're ignorant of the larger reality, according to what I would consider a larger reality, but you're also not contributing by having an enfrightened or a scared perception of what you're seeing, what's being fed to you through the media. But it is very controlling. In the education system, the whole 9 yards, we're controlled at every turn. It's just a matter of realizing that we're controlled and realizing that if enough of us collectively, again, just say no. I can't emphasize how simple that is. It sounds too simple. But a thought is a thing, and energy follows thought. And so as more thoughts, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, on up to 6 billion, as we have the thought increase more, and more people are thinking along a positive future, for our planet, and not a negative future, that is what we're going to help manifest. I'd like to take this time to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I'd like to encourage everybody to stay tuned for Chris Athanas and the Reality Expander TV show coming up next on this same channel. And if you folks can tune in next Tuesday. We're here every Tuesday live from 8 to 9 on Channel 10. Just like to say, don't give up hope, Austin. There are things that we can do to help one another. Please, please have confidence that we, the little man in the street, can make a difference. We can collectively come together, change thought. Again, energy follows thought. We can make it happen. We can make this work